Part 1. The Consortium's official designation for humanity, logged in quintillions of crystalline data shards across their sterile networks, was adaptable bipedal labor. That was the first mistake. They saw our cities and our art, our wars and our moments of fleeting peace, and distilled it all into a single, efficient classification. They didn't use words like conquest or invasion. Their terminology was rooted in corporate efficiency, acquisition, resource integration, personnel reallocation. When their monolithic, silent vessels first eclipsed our sun, they didn't arrive with the roar of engines and the flash of plasma, but with the quiet hum of a hostile takeover. They offered us cures for our diseases, solutions for our famines, and an end to our self-destructive tendencies. In return, they asked only for our surplus labor and our undeveloped resources. It was a bargain struck in a language we couldn't yet comprehend, a contract whose fine print was written in the slow, creeping erasure of everything we were. I remember the day they took my daughter, Lily. There was no violence, no screaming, just the polite, synthesized chime of a consortium compliance unit at our door. She was 8 years old, and according to their psychometric evaluations, she displayed suboptimal emotional regulation with a propensity for creative deviation. They called it re-education. They promised she would be returned, optimized for a productive life within the new societal framework. Her last word to me wasn't daddy or help, but a confused, whispered wag as a chrome-plated hand gently guided her into a transport. That was 12 years ago. Now, my name is Unit 734, and I am a xenobotanist on the barren moon of Xylos, a place where the only thing that grows is what the consortium wills into existence. My job, my entire purpose, is to cultivate the Cathar fungus, a marvel of bioengineering that can break down inorganic rock into arable soil over centuries. I tend to vast, climate-controlled biodomes where the gray dust of this moon is slowly, painstakingly being taught the language of life. They chose me for this role because of my past, because I once wrote papers on cellular respiration and symbiotic terraforming. They saw a broken man with a useful skill set, a harmless tool to be wielded. That was their second mistake. They thought the silence they'd imposed upon us was acceptance. They mistook our grief for compliance. But in the quiet hum of the nutrient regulators and the sterile glow of the grow lamps, I was learning. The Cathar fungus was designed for patience, for a slow, methodical consumption of stone. But life is adaptable, and so is the man who cultivates it. I began to experiment, diverting minuscule portions of the nutrient paste, introducing trace elements I scraped from the inside of maintenance panels and filtration systems. I was teaching the fungus a new appetite. The consortium's technology, their ships, their structures, their very bodies, were all based on a unique, resonant polymer alloy. It was strong, light, and self-repairing, the foundation of their dominance. I wanted to see if I could teach my patient, rock-eating fungus, to prefer the taste of that alloy, to consume it not over centuries, but over weeks, then days, then hours. My lab was my prison, but it was also my sanctuary. The overseers, beings of spindly limbs and multifaceted eyes called the Vex, rarely entered. They found the organic processes distasteful, preferring to monitor my work through sensors and data streams. This arrogance gave me the freedom I needed. In a sealed terrarium behind a bank of useless atmospheric converters, My secret garden began to grow. It wasn't much to look at, just a patch of viscous, gray mold slowly creeping over a piece of alloy I had managed to pry from a broken-down cargo drone. For the first year, it did nothing. The fungus starved, refusing the new food source. I almost gave up 100 times, the memory of Lily's confused face a constant, aching wound that whispered of futility. But human beings are defined by two things: an irrational capacity for hope and a terrifying talent for hatred. I held on to both. The breakthrough came when I introduced a catalyst, a protein sequence I synthesized from my own blood. It was a desperate, unscientific move, but something in our biology, something in our stubborn, chaotic DNA, resonated with the fungus. The mold began to change. Its color shifted from a dull gray to a mottled, sickly black, and where it touched the alloy, a fine, rust-like powder began to form. The polymer was degrading, its resonant bonds unraveling into inert dust. I had created a weapon that they would never see coming, a silent, creeping plague that fed on the very bones of their empire. The challenge was delivery. I was a prisoner, watched and monitored. I could kill this entire moon, let the fungus eat the dome from the inside out. But we would die with it. My revenge needed to be a message, not a suicide pact. It needed to travel. That's where Anya came in. Unit 219. She was a mechanic, a woman whose face was a roadmap of cynicism and loss, her hands permanently stained with lubricant and grit. She kept the colony's life support, recyclers, and transport systems running. She saw the universe not as a collection of wonders, but as a series of machines waiting to break down. I watched her for months, saw the way her jaw tightened when a Vex overseer glided past, the subtle contempt in her eyes as she repaired the technology of our captors. One cycle, under the pretense of a contaminated ventilation filter near my biodome, I requested her assistance. As she worked, her back to the sensors, I spoke in a low voice, not looking at her. The intake valve on the primary nutrient line for Dome 4 is showing signs of metallic corrosion. It's unusual. She didn't stop her work, her movements economical and precise. Everything corrodes eventually. Botanist. Not this alloy, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. It's not supposed to. She paused for a fraction of a second, her wrench hovering over a bolt. Report it to the overseer. They'll log it, and nothing will happen. I think it's a blight. I pressed on, the words feeling clumsy and loud in the sterile air. Something that eats their metal, something that could be cultivated, something that could be spread. She finally stopped, slowly turning her head to look at me. Her eyes were dark and piercing, searching for a trap, for madness, for the false hope that had broken so many others. I simply met her gaze, letting her see the cold, patient fire that had been burning in me for 12 years. I showed her my secret garden, the small terrarium where the black mold was methodically turning a piece of their unbreachable technology into dust. She stared at it for a long time, her cynical mask cracking just enough to reveal the prisoner beneath. How she asked, her voice barely a whisper. They took my daughter, I replied. And that was all the explanation she needed. We became silent conspirators, ghosts in their machine. Anya knew the colony's circulatory system, its veins and arteries of ventilation shafts, coolant pipes, and waste disposal chutes. She identified the perfect target for our first real test, the Central Communications Relay. It wasn't a life support system. so a failure wouldn't kill us. But it was the colony's connection to the consortium, the conduit through which data, reports, and my own monotonous existence were transmitted. Silencing it would be like cutting the optic nerve of a great beast. It wouldn't kill it, but it would be the first moment of blindness, of uncertainty. Under the guise of routine maintenance, Anya fabricated a new filter for the relay's cooling system, a filter whose porous core I had carefully inoculated with a dormant, powdered culture of my engineered fungus. The plan was simple. When the system activated, airborne spores would be drawn into the delicate, alloy-based circuitry of the relay. The heat and energy running through the system would provide the perfect environment for the fungus to wake up and feed. We had one shot. If they detected the biological agent, we would be vivisected for study, our miserable lives ending as a footnote in a Vex pathology report. The night we put the plan into motion, the two moons of Xylos cast a pale, overlapping light across the gray dust. The colony was quiet, humming with the illusion of peaceful productivity. Anya gave me a single, sharp nod from across the maintenance yard before disappearing into the service tunnels. I returned to my biodome, my hands trembling as I tended to the harmless, rock-eating fungus that was our salvation and our cover. I watched the data feed from my station, my eyes locked on the temperature and power readings for the communications relay. For 3 hours, nothing happened. The numbers remained stable. Mocking my hope, I felt a familiar despair creeping in, the cold certainty that we were nothing more than what they'd labeled us, adaptable labor, destined to work and die in silence. And then I saw it. A flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible dip in the relay's energy efficiency. It was a rounding error, something any automated diagnostic would dismiss. But I knew what it was. It was the first bite. Over the next hour, the efficiency dropped again, this time by a full percentage point. Then another. A low-level alert pinged somewhere in the colony's central processing, but it was flagged as non-critical. A technician would look at it in the morning cycle. By morning, it would be too late. A sense of cold, terrifying elation filled me. It was the feeling of a god watching his creation take its first breath. I had planted a seed of decay in the heart of their perfect machine. Anya met me at the cycle shift change, her face as impassive as ever, but her eyes held a new light. She handed me a cleaning rag, and inside its folds was a small, scorched piece of polymer, pitted and crumbling at the edges. It was from the relay's primary circuit board. She leaned close, her voice a low growl of triumph mixed with fear. "It's working. The whole damn relay is running hot. They think it's a power surge." I looked at the crumbling alloy in my hand. It was more than just a successful test. It was a promise. It was the answer to a question my daughter had asked with her eyes 12 years ago. Why? Because you underestimated us. You classified us, contained us, and forgot us. You saw farmers, mechanics, and botanists. You didn't see the rage we harvested in the silence. You didn't understand that when you take everything from a species, you don't leave them with nothing. You leave them with everything to lose, and that is a terrifying thing to behold. Standing there, in the gray, artificial dawn of a prison moon, I knew this was just at the beginning. We were no longer adaptable bipedal labor. We were a blight, and we were about to spread. The silence from the communications relay lasted for 2 full cycles before the Vex overseers began to show their first signs of agitation. Their usual gliding, serene movements became sharp and erratic. We, the human units, kept our heads down, feigning the ignorant compliance that had become our most effective camouflage. They couldn't diagnose the problem because their entire technological philosophy was built on the infallibility of their materials. Their systems searched for energy spikes, software glitches, and physical breaches. They were not programmed to look for an infection. They brought in off-world technicians, specialized Vex with even more spindly limbs and diagnostic tools that hummed with useless energy. They dismantled the relay piece by piece, their multifaceted eyes staring in disbelief at the fine black dust that coated every internal surface, a dust that was once the very circuits they were trying to repair. Their reports, which Anya managed to intercept fragments of through a secondary network, were a litany of confusion. Unknown corrosive agent, atypical molecular decay, cascading material failure. They were scientists facing a ghost. They couldn't conceive of a biological agent that consumed inorganic matter with such specificity. It was outside their understanding of the universe, and therefore, it was impossible. Their impossibility was our opportunity. While they were distracted, focused on their broken toy, we began to prepare for Phase 2. Anya, with her intricate knowledge of the colony's guts, identified a network of service drones. These small, semi-autonomous units were responsible for everything from scrubbing atmospheric condensers to delivering nutrient paste to the Vex living quarters. They were everywhere, their access nearly unlimited, and, most importantly, their internal chassis were made of the same resonant alloy. They were the perfect carriers, a fleet of unknowing typhoid Marys. My work in the biodome intensified. I began cultivating the fungus in a liquid suspension, a serum that could be painted onto surfaces, drying into a layer of invisible, dormant spores, waiting for the right energy signature to awaken them. It was a painstaking process. Every night, after my official work was done, I would stay in the lab, crouched in the shadows of the giant Cathar blooms, meticulously brewing our silent rebellion. The fear was a constant companion, a cold knot in my stomach, a single mistake, a misplaced sample, an unexpected inspection, and it would all be over. But the memory of Lily was a stronger force than fear. Every drop of the black liquid I synthesized was a whispered promise to her. The human population of Xylos was a scattered, broken thing. We rarely spoke to each other, years of surveillance having bred a deep-seated paranoia into our souls. But now, something was changing. The shutdown of the relay, an event the Vex tried to hide, but which was obvious in the sudden lack of new propaganda, broadcasts, and the delayed supply ships, had created a crack in the suffocating atmosphere of control. Hope, I realized, was as contagious as my fungus. It started with a look, a shared glance in the mess hall that lingered a moment too long. It grew into a whispered word in a darkened corridor, the secret exchange of a piece of scavenged scrap metal. Anya and I knew we couldn't do this alone. We needed more than just a mechanic and a botanist. We needed eyes, ears, and hands. We needed to turn our broken, silent community into a network. Our first recruit was an old man named Samuel, Unit 142. He was in charge of waste reclamation. It was a foul, thankless job, but it gave him access to the colony's refuse, a treasure trove of discarded consortium tech and information. Samuel had been a historian on Earth, a keeper of stories. The consortium had deemed his profession non-essential and historically revisionist. He had watched them erase our past, and his anger was as deep and quiet as my own. I showed him the fungus. He didn't flinch. He simply touched the crumbling piece of alloy from the relay, a strange reverence in his gesture. "The mills of the gods grind slowly," he murmured, his voice raspy from disuse. "But they grind exceedingly fine." Samuel became our archivist, our memory. He pieced together the Vex reports Anya intercepted, building a map of their command structure, their fears, their blind spots. Our second recruit was a young woman named Elara. Unit 801. She worked in the medical bay, a place of sterile efficiency where injured human units were patched up just enough to be returned to their tasks. She was a doctor, or had been, before the consortium reclassified medicine as biological maintenance. Elara had the stomach for the grim realities of our plan. She understood dosages and vectors, contamination protocols, and cellular biology. She refined my liquid suspension, making it more potent, more resilient. She also became our medic, preparing for the day when our silent war would inevitably turn loud, and we would have to tend to our own. Together, the four of us formed the nucleus of a rebellion that didn't even have a name. We were a botanist, a mechanic, a historian, and a doctor. We were the harmless, the broken, the reallocated personnel. And we were preparing to bring an empire to its knees, not with bombs and bullets, but with a spore. We chose the drone fleet's maintenance bay as our next target. Anya scheduled a full system flush of the bay's lubrication lines, a routine procedure that would go unnoticed. The night before, Samuel created a diversion, deliberately shorting out a secondary power conduit on the far side of the colony, drawing the Vex patrols away. Under that cover, Elara and I, disguised in maintenance overalls, moved through the service tunnels. My heart pounded with every step, the vial of black liquid in my pocket feeling as heavy as a dying star. Elara was calm, her focus absolute. She was the one who pointed out the flaws in my initial plan, the potential for cross-contamination, the need for a control. She was thinking not just of the attack, but of the aftermath. We reached the maintenance bay, a vast, cavernous space where hundreds of drones hung in neat rows on charging stations, their optical sensors dark and lifeless. It was like a morgue for machines. Anya was already there, the main lubrication tank open and waiting. Without a word, I uncapped the vial and poured the contents into the tank. The black liquid dispersed into the clear lubricant, turning it cloudy for a moment before disappearing completely. It was done. Our plague was now in the very lifeblood of the drone's maintenance system. Every drone that came in for its routine servicing would be invisibly painted with our weapon. They would then carry it with them to every corner of the colony, to the Vex quarters, to the shuttle bays, to the life support systems. The seed was not just planted, it was about to be scattered on the wind. As we retreated back into the tunnels, the silence of the drone bay behind us, I felt a tremor of what I had done. I, a man who had dedicated his life to creating and nurturing life, had just unleashed a plague. This wasn't just revenge for Lily anymore. It was an act of war, declared not by a nation or an army, but by 4 broken people on a forgotten moon. We were changing the fungus, but it was also changing us. The slow, patient work of cultivation had given way to the cold, precise calculus of destruction. We were becoming the monsters they never thought we could be. And as the first drone whirred to life for its morning cycle, its joints freshly lubricated and its chassis now a carrier of a silent, creeping death, I knew the consortium would soon learn the true meaning of our classification. We were indeed adaptable. We had adapted to our cage. We had adapted to our grief. And now we had adapted to war. Their second mistake was thinking we were tools. Their final mistake would be discovering that we were weapons. Part 2. The initial decay was beautiful in its subtlety, a quiet symphony of entropy that only Anya and I were equipped to hear. It began with the little things. An automated door on the residential block would hesitate for a moment before sliding open. A nutrient dispenser in the mess hall would issue a portion that was 3 grams too light. The optical sensors on the Vex Overseer's personal drones would flicker, their focus momentarily blurring before recalibrating with a near-silent click. To the untrained eye, these were minor, unrelated malfunctions, the inevitable friction of a complex system. To the Vex, they were statistical noise. But to Anya, they were the first notes of a revolution. She kept a hidden log, a small data slate she'd shielded from the network, marking each failure on a schematic of the colony. "The rot is in the bones," she whispered to me one cycle, as we stood in the shadow of a giant, humming atmospheric processor. The drones carried it everywhere. It's in the climate control for their living quarters, the guidance systems for the cargo loaders, even the filtration pump for the Overseer's private nutrient vat. Her voice was grim, but her eyes held a spark I hadn't seen since before the consortium came. It was the fierce pride of a master craftsman watching her work unfold. My own pride was colder, tangled with a growing sense of dread. In the biodome, I was still a creator, a nurturer of life, but outside, I was a plague bringer. I watched the Vex, their serene confidence beginning to fray at the edges. They ran endless diagnostics, their spindly fingers dancing over holographic interfaces, searching for a logical error in their perfect system. They were trying to fix a machine, while we were poisoning the water supply. The first major failure occurred a week after the drone inoculation. The primary solar condenser, a massive array of panels that followed the dim star of Xylos across the sky, froze in place. Its tracking motors, lubricated and maintained by the now infected drones, had seized. The colony's power levels dipped by 12%, triggering alarms that could not be ignored. The Vex descended on the condenser array like agitated insects, their chittering language, usually a calm series of clicks and whistles, rising in pitch and tempo. They found what we knew they would, motors filled with a black, gritty substance. The alloy of their gears and casings degraded into useless powder. They classified the substance as an unidentified crystalline precipitate, a byproduct of an unknown chemical reaction. They still couldn't see the truth. They blamed solar radiation, faulty manufacturing, even magnetic interference from the moon's core. Biology was not a variable in their equation of power. While they were distracted, our cell grew. Samuel, our historian, used the power fluctuations as cover to access deeper layers of the Vex archives. He discovered something that chilled us to the bone. Xylos wasn't just a fungiculture colony. It was a waypoint. Once every standard year, a massive transport ship, the Stellaron, would dock here. It wasn't a cargo freighter or a military vessel. Its manifest listed its contents as reallocated personnel. It was a slave ship, and it was due in 3 months. Lily had been taken in a ship just like that. The knowledge that another vessel of its kind would soon be here, filled with more children, more broken families, solidified our purpose. We weren't just fighting for ourselves anymore. We were fighting for them. We brought in another, a man named Jorik. Unit 551. He was the colony's supply clerk, a man who existed in a world of numbers and logistics. He was a ghost, overlooked by everyone, but he saw everything. He knew which units were wearing thin, which Vex overseer was requisitioning extra power packs for personal projects, and which life support systems were being secretly cannibalized for parts. Yorick was a creature of patterns, and he had noticed the pattern of decay before we even approached him. He didn't need convincing, only direction. With Yorick managing our resources, we became more efficient. He could divert medical supplies to Alara, acquire restricted tools for Anya, and flag my biodome's nutrient shipments as spoiled to give me a surplus for my work, all with a few keystrokes that would be lost in the system's growing chaos. The failures across the colony began to cascade. Life support flickered. Water recyclers stalled, flooding sections of the lower decks with gray, sludgy water. The automated defense grid that protected the colony from micrometeorites began to suffer phantom sensor readings, firing its plasma charges at empty space. Xylos was becoming a haunted house, and the Vex were the ones being driven mad by the rattling chains they couldn't see. Their frustration finally boiled over. If the machine wasn't broken, then the operators must be. The Vex declared a system-wide compliance audit. They believed the malfunctions were a result of human negligence, a subtle and coordinated campaign of industrial sabotage. In a way, they were right. They just had the wrong method. The audit was brutal. They rounded us up in the central plaza, the gray dust swirling around our ankles under the harsh glare of portable floodlights. The Vex, flanked by hulking, chrome-plated security drones, moved through our ranks, their multifaceted eyes scanning each of us. They weren't looking for guilt, they were looking for fear. They randomly selected 10 units, dragging them from the crowd. One was a young woman who worked in the hydroponics bay, another an old man who swept the corridors. They were nobodies, chosen for their anonymity. The lead overseer, a towering Vex with a deep, resonant voice, addressed the silent crowd. Its synthesized voice echoed through the plaza. Productivity has fallen. System integrity is compromised. This unit collective has failed to meet its designated parameters. Recalibration is necessary. The security drones raised their energy batons. They didn't kill the 10 prisoners. They did something worse. They broke them. One by one, they methodically shattered a limb on each person and arm, a leg with a sickening, wet crunch, followed by a scream that was quickly choked off. They left them writhing on the ground, a testament to the cost of inefficiency. I watched. My fists clenched so tightly my knuckles were white, my stomach churning with a mixture of rage and guilt. This was my fault. My silent, elegant weapon had resulted in this crude, barbaric display. I had wanted the consortium to suffer, but I had given them an excuse to turn their cruelty back on my own people. Alara, standing beside me, didn't flinch. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "Look at their faces," she murmured, her voice so low only I could hear. "Look at the humans. They're not scared anymore. They're angry." She was right. The Vex had intended to terrorize us back into submission, but they had miscalculated the human spirit. They had poured gasoline on a fire they didn't even know was burning. The public beatings were their third, and perhaps most critical, mistake. They had just turned a conspiracy into a rebellion. That night, the four of us met in the Waste Reclamation Center, the stench of refuse a fitting backdrop for our new reality. The mood was grim. "They're hunting," Anya said, her voice tight. "They're not looking for a fungus anymore. They're looking for saboteurs. They'll start tearing this place, and us, apart." Samuel, his face etched with sorrow for the people he had seen broken, looked at me. "Your weapon has awakened not only us, but them as well. Their paranoia will be their undoing, but it may be ours first." He was right. We had to escalate. Our timeline had been violently accelerated. The slow, methodical decay of the colony was no longer enough. We needed to get off this moon. We needed to seize the Stellaron. The idea was insane. A handful of unarmed prisoners taking on a consortium transport ship. It was a suicide mission. But as we looked at each other in the dim, flickering light of Samuel's hidden workshop, we saw the same grim resolve in each other's eyes. We were all already dead. We had died the day the consortium arrived, the day they took our children, our history, our names. All we had left was the choice of how to burn. Yorick, our quiet logistician, was the one who provided the key. "The Stellaron doesn't just dock," he said, pulling up a schematic on his slate. "It integrates for 72 hours. It connects to the colony's power grid, its life support, its data network. It becomes part of Xylos. It becomes vulnerable." Anya's eyes lit up with a dangerous gleam. "If we're in the colony systems, we're in the ship systems. And if the colony is infected," Alara added, her voice cold and precise, "the ship will be too." The plan began to form, a desperate, beautiful, and terrifying thing. We would not just infect the Stellaron. We would turn Xylos itself into the weapon. We would use the docking procedure to upload a concentrated, weaponized dose of the fungus directly into the ship's core systems. But to do that, we needed to control the colony's central command, the nexus of all its operations, a place known only as the Spire. It was the brain of Xylos, located at the very top of the main habitat, the exclusive domain of the Vex overseers. No human had ever been inside. Our focus shifted. The mission was no longer about simple decay, it was about a targeted strike. Alara began working on a new strain of the fungus, one that was hyper-aggressive, designed to consume the alloy in minutes, not days. She called it Lily's Kiss. I felt a pang at the name, a mixture of honor and profound sorrow. My daughter's memory was now attached to a bioweapon that could tear a starship apart from the inside. Anya started mapping the conduits and power lines leading to the Spire, looking for a weakness, a way to breach their inner sanctum. Samuel dug through the archives for Vex patrol schedules and security protocols, while Yorick began to slowly and quietly misdirect critical supplies, creating small, hidden caches of power cells, cutting tools, and medical kits around the colony. We were preparing for a battle. The other humans, their anger still simmering from the public beatings, were ready. When Samuel and Anya began discreetly approaching people, a grizzled engineer, a quiet hydroponics worker, a former soldier now working as a janitor, they found no resistance. The Vex had broken their fear, and in its place was a void ready to be filled with purpose. Our network grew from 4 to 40. We were a ghost army, moving through the cracks of their surveillance, communicating with nods and coded messages, preparing for a single, coordinated strike. I felt the weight of it all. I was the one who had started this, the botanist who had taught a fungus to hate. Now I was a leader in a rebellion I never asked for, responsible for the lives of people who had placed their last, desperate hope in my creation, standing alone in my biodome, looking at the gray, docile fungus that was our cover story. I thought of Lily. I had started this to avenge her, but it had become something more. This was about ensuring that no other parent had to stand at a door and watch their child be reallocated. We would seize the Stellaron, and we would turn its terrible purpose back on its masters. We would become the vessel that carried not slaves, but a plague, to the heart of the consortium. The price would be high, paid in blood and sacrifice. But as I looked out at the 2 moons hanging in the black sky, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my weary bones, that it was a price we were all willing to pay. The quiet war was over. The real one was about to begin. Part 3. The 3 months leading up to the Stellaron's arrival were a blur of clandestine activity. A master class in organized dissent conducted in whispers and shadows. The colony of Xylos transformed. The pervasive atmosphere of defeated silence was replaced by a low, electric hum of shared purpose. We were no longer a collection of isolated units. We were an organism, and every component was learning its function. My biodome became the heart of the operation. By day, I was Unit 734, the quiet botanist tending to his fungus. By night, surrounded by the strange, bioluminescent glow of my Cathar blooms, I was a munitions expert, brewing death in petri dishes. Alara's refinements to the fungus were terrifyingly effective. The new strain, Lily's Kiss, was ravenous. In our tests on scavenged scraps of alloy, it didn't just corrode, it swarmed. A wave of black decay that consumed the metal in a matter of minutes, leaving behind nothing but a faint, acrid smell and inert dust. It was a perfect weapon, but its potency was a double-edged sword. A single misplaced spore could cripple our own hidden caches of equipment, or, worse, reveal our hand prematurely. Alara, with her clinical precision, developed a 2-part delivery system. The spores were suspended in a benign gel and would only become active when exposed to a second chemical agent, a catalyst we could introduce into a target system moments before we needed the decay to begin. It was a failsafe, a way to control the fire we were about to unleash. Anya became a warlord of scrap. Under her direction, teams of engineers and mechanics, men and women who had spent years repairing the machines of their captors, now began to secretly build them for themselves. They turned pneumatic drills into projectile launchers, fashioned mining lasers into crude but effective cutting torches, and welded plates of scavenged metal into makeshift body armor. Our arsenal was a pathetic mockery of consortium technology, a collection of repurposed tools and desperate ingenuity. But it was ours. Samuel, meanwhile, was our spy master. He and his network of janitors and reclamation specialists became the colony's nervous system. They knew every Vex patrol route, every shift change, every flicker of a security sensor. They mapped the blind spots in the surveillance network, creating safe passages through the colony's arteries. More than that, they became our storytellers. Samuel would hold secret gatherings in the deepest parts of the waste reclamation tunnels, his voice a low, powerful whisper in the darkness. He didn't speak of battle plans or logistics. He spoke of Earth. He told stories of our history, of our art, of our defiance, of the vibrant, chaotic world the Consortium had tried to erase. He was reminding us of what we were fighting for, reforging our broken identity one forbidden memory at a time. The Vex, consumed by their own paranoia, only accelerated our efforts. They implemented new, harsher protocols. Rations were cut. Work shifts were extended. Any human unit caught communicating outside of their designated tasks was subjected to sensory recalibration, a polite term for a session in a sonic agony booth. They thought they were crushing our descent. Instead, they were tempering it, hardening our resolve with every new cruelty. They were making us sharper. The day came. A single, encrypted message appeared on Yorick's supply console, Stellaron ETA 72 hours. The time for preparation was over. That night, the leaders of our 40-person ghost army gathered for the last time. We stood in a circle in Samuel's workshop, the air thick with the smell of ozone from Anya's welders and the faint, earthy scent of my fungal cultures. There was no grand speech. We all knew the stakes. We were about to launch a frontal assault on the nerve center of a technologically superior, utterly ruthless enemy. Most of us would not survive the next cycle. Anya laid out the plan one final time, pointing to a flickering schematic projected onto the wall. The diversion will be Jorik's masterpiece, a cascading overload in the geothermal regulators. It'll be loud, violent, and messy. It will seem like a catastrophic industrial accident. The Vex will have to pull 90% of their security patrols to contain it, including the units stationed at the main shuttle bay. She then traced a thin, blue line through the service tunnels. That gives us a 17-minute window. A 20-person assault team, led by me, will move to the base of the spire. We breach here at the primary coolant intake. It's the one place their internal sensors are weakest. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Alara. She pressed a small, shielded canister into my hand. It was cold to the touch. The payload. 1 vial of the catalyst. 1 of the spores. I'll be with the secondary team, securing the medical bay. We'll need a place to bring our wounded, assuming there are any. Her pragmatism was a cold comfort. I was to be part of the main assault team, tasked with carrying the payload to the Spire's central command. It was my creation. It was my burden to deliver it. I looked at the faces around me, grim, tired, but filled with a light I hadn't seen in over a decade. It was the fierce, terrible light of people who had finally reclaimed their own agency. We were no longer victims. We were a reckoning. The diversion began with a low, gut-wrenching groan that vibrated through the very floor of the colony. Then came the explosion. A pillar of superheated steam and molten rock erupted from a ventilation shaft on the far side of the colony, shattering the gray, monotonous landscape. Alarms blared, a chaotic symphony of whoops and sirens. We could hear the Vex security patrols scrambling, their metallic limbs clattering on the walkways as they raced towards the manufactured disaster. Go! Anya's voice crackled over the cheap short-range communicators we'd built. Window is open. We moved like wraiths through the service tunnels, our makeshift armor clanking softly in the echoing darkness. Anya was in the lead, her customized plasma cutter held at the ready. I was in the middle of the formation, the precious canister clutched to my chest, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The tunnels were a maze, but Anya navigated them with an instinctual grace, her every turn precise and certain. We were making good time. The path was clear. It was too clear. We reached the coolant intake station at the base of the spire. It was a large, circular chamber dominated by a massive humming pump. According to Samuel's intelligence, it was supposed to be guarded by a single Vex patrol and 2 automated turrets. It was empty. The turrets were powered down, their barrels aimed harmlessly at the ceiling. "Trap," a former soldier named Kyle muttered from behind me. "They knew." Anya breathed, her eyes scanning the chamber. "They let the diversion happen. They wanted us to come here." Before anyone could react, panels slid open in the walls. Not with the hiss of hydraulics, but with a wet and organic tearing sound. From the darkness emerged creatures that were a perversion of life. They were bioengineered horrors, a Vex creation designed to fight a war we didn't know they were capable of. They were insectoid, but not insects. They stood on 4 razor-sharp limbs, their bodies covered in a shimmering aceitinous armor that seemed to absorb the light. They had no visible eyes, only a smooth, featureless head that twitched and tilted, sensing us with some alien vibration. In place of hands, they had long, scythe-like blades of bone. They were silent, their movements unnaturally fluid and fast. They were the Vex's answer to our biological warfare. The Vex had been studying us, too. They must have detected traces of the fungus, analyzed it, and engineered a countermeasure. Not a cure, but a predator. These things weren't machines. They couldn't be infected. They could only be killed. They attacked without a sound. One moment they were emerging from the walls. The next they were upon us. The corridor erupted into a cacophony of shrieking metal, desperate shouts, and the wet, percussive thud of bone blades striking scavenged armor. A man next to me went down, his chest plate sheared clean in 2, a silent gasp on his lips. Anya was a whirlwind of fury, her plasma cutter hissing as she parried a scythe-like claw, the searing energy leaving a black, bubbling scar on the creature's chitin. Kyle and the other ex-soldiers formed a line, their projectile launchers spitting out steel spikes that sparked and ricocheted off the creature's armored hides. I fired my own weapon, a repurposed rivet gun, but the metal bolts just bounced off. These things were designed to fight military-grade hardware, not a mechanics rebellion. We were completely outmatched. Our elegant plan of a silent, viral takeover had devolved into a desperate, brutal brawl in a concrete tomb. The path to the spire was blocked by a wall of living weapons, and our 17-minute window was slamming shut. Anya screamed over the comm, her voice strained amidst the chaos. "They funneled us. We have to pull back." "No," I yelled back, the sound torn from my throat. I looked at the canister in my hand. Lily's kiss. "There's no pulling back. The Stellaron is still coming. We go through them." A moment of shocked silence on the comm, broken only by the sounds of the vicious fight. We had planned for a stealth mission. This was a slaughter. But I knew, with a sudden, terrible clarity, that retreat was the same as death. If we failed here, we would die in the Vex labs, and everyone on the Stellaron would be condemned to the same fate. My words, born of desperation, hung in the air. I saw Anya glance at me, her face smeared with grease and something darker, her eyes wide with the frenzy of battle. She saw the same truth I did. This was our one and only chance. The time for silence, for subtlety, for the slow, creeping rot was over. With a guttural scream that was part terror and part catharsis, Anya leveled her plasma cutter not at a creature, but at the massive locking mechanism on the blast door behind them, the door that led into the spire. "Forward, Shay!" she roared, her voice a rallying cry for the damned. "The only way out is up." The beam of her cutter erupted, and the battle for the soul of Xylos began in earnest. Part 4. Anya's desperate gambit changed the geometry of the fight. We were no longer trying to defeat the Vex biohorrors. We were simply trying to survive them long enough to get through the door. The roar of her plasma cutter, chewing through the reinforced alloy of the locking mechanism, became the focal point of our world, a promise of passage through hell. 3 of our teams sacrificed themselves to buy her those precious seconds, creating a wall of bodies and suppressive fire that briefly slowed the creature's silent, scything advance. I saw Kyle, the stoic ex-soldier, jam the barrel of his projectile launcher into the joint of a creature's leg and pull the trigger, the resulting explosion tearing them both apart in a shower of shrapnel and black ichor. With a final, agonized groan, the lock gave way, and Anya kicked the heavy door inward. "Go now," she screamed, her voice raw. We scrambled through the opening, dragging our wounded with us, into the sterile, white interior of the spire. Anya was the last one through, searing the door controls behind us, sealing the entrance just as the first of the bone-scythed monstrosities slammed against it. We were in, but we were trapped, bleeding, and catastrophically off schedule. The pristine corridor, bathed in the calm, cold light of Vex architecture, was a stark contrast to the bloody chaos we had just escaped. Of our 20-person assault team, only 9 of us remained. 4 were wounded, one of them critically. The silence inside was unnerving, broken only by our ragged breaths and the rhythmic, heavy thud of the creatures throwing themselves against the sealed door. They wouldn't get through, but they didn't have to. Our window was gone. The element of surprise was a forgotten dream. "They're hurting us," a woman named Lena, a comms tech, whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "They wanted us in here." She was right. This wasn't a fortress we had breached. It was a cage we had willingly entered. Every calm, empty corridor was an ambush waiting to happen. Every silent door a potential tomb. "Then we don't play their game," Anya said, her voice regaining its steel. She ripped a schematic panel from the wall, her fingers flying across the exposed circuitry. "The Central Command Nexus is 10 levels up, directly above us. We can't take the lifts. They'll trap us. We take the ventilation shafts. It'll be tight, and it'll be dark, but they won't expect it." It was a desperate move, but desperation was all we had left. We found an access grate and pried it open. The shaft was a vertical chasm of darkness, ribbed with conduits and thick with the smell of ozone and recycled air. It was a climb into the unknown, with the sounds of our own labored breathing and the distant, rhythmic pounding at the door below as our only companions. The ascent was a nightmare. We climbed in near total darkness, guided only by the faint glow from Anya's jury-rigged hand lamp. The wounded were a heavy burden, their groans of pain echoing in the tight space. Twice, we had to pause to allow Ilara's second-in-command, a medic named Reese, to administer emergency aid, his hands working deftly in the cramped darkness. I climbed with the canister containing Lily's kiss strapped tightly to my chest. Its weight felt immense, a physical manifestation of all the lives, both lost and yet to be lost, that hinged on its delivery. I was no soldier, no leader. I was a botanist, a man who understood the slow, patient language of cells. This world of violence and vertical shafts was alien to me. But every time my grip slipped or my muscles screamed in protest, I saw Lily's face, her confused eyes asking that impossible question, and I found a new reserve of strength. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the access grate for the command level. Anya sliced it open with a low-powered, almost silent beam from her cutter. We spilled out into another sterile, white corridor, this one lined with pulsing data conduits. We had arrived. The command nexus was just ahead, a single, circular chamber visible through a thick, translucent wall. Inside, we could see them, the Vex, not the spindly, gliding overseers we were used to, but a different caste. They were larger, their bodies integrated into complex, throne-like consoles. Wires and data cables snaked from their limbs, connecting them directly to the station's core. They were the pilots, the true consciousness of Xylos, their minds and the station's systems fused into one. And floating in the center of the chamber, suspended in a shimmering, anti-gravity field, was the master node, a crystalline sphere pulsing with soft, internal light. It was the brain, the heart, the soul of their control. "That's our target," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "If we introduce the fungus there, it will spread through their entire network. It will reach the Stellaron the moment it docks and connects." The chamber was sealed by a single formidable blast door. There would be no stealthy entry. "No more tricks," Anya said, hefting her plasma cutter. "We go loud. We go fast. Reese, Lena, you stay with the wounded. The rest of us, we clear a path for him." She nodded at me. The final suicidal charge. The four of them, Anya, myself, and two others took positions. I fumbled with the canister, my hands slick with sweat. I separated the two vials, the dormant spores, and the catalyst. The plan was to shatter them both on the master node. The resulting aerosolized cloud would be drawn into the node's internal cooling system, and the infection would begin. Anya gave me a final, hard look. There was no fear in her eyes, only a burning, incandescent resolve. "For your daughter, botanist," she said. Then she nodded to the others. "Light 'em up." They blew the door. The explosion was deafening, a concussive blast that sent a shock wave of heat and pressure down the corridor. We charged through the smoke and debris into the blinding white light of the command nexus. The Vex pilots, ripped from their silent communion with the machine, reacted with unnatural speed. Security drones, sleek, black, and armed with high-frequency plasma rifles, dropped from ceiling panels. Automated turrets unfolded from the walls. The chamber, once a place of serene control, became a maelstrom of searing energy bolts and screaming alarms. My three comrades were a shield of flesh and fire, their lives a currency they spent to buy me seconds. I saw one of them, a man whose name I never even learned, get vaporized by a turret blast. His scream cut short. The other was stitched across the chest by a drone's rapid-fire pulses, collapsing in a heap of smoking armor. Anya was a demon. She moved with a dancer's grace and a berserker's fury, her plasma cutter a blade of pure energy, deflecting shots, slicing through drones, her every movement aimed at drawing fire, at creating a pocket of chaos for me to move through. I ran. My legs pumped. My lungs burned. My entire world narrowed to the pulsing, crystalline sphere in the center of the room. A plasma bolt seared past my head, so close I could smell my own hair burning. I stumbled, fell, and crawled the last few feet. The smooth, cold floor, slick with someone's blood. I could feel the hum of the master node, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated in my teeth. I was there. I was at the heart of the beast. I raised the 2 vials, my arm trembling with exhaustion and terror. And then a voice echoed through the chamber, not from a speaker, but inside my own head. It was cold, clinical, and utterly alien. Unidentified biological agent detected. Analysis weaponized. Self-replicating. Designed for targeted material decay. You are the source. I froze, my hand hovering over the node. One of the Vex pilots. The largest one, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, was staring directly at me. It wasn't looking at me with its multifaceted eyes, but with its mind. It was inside my head. Your motivation is classified as revenge, a primitive emotional response to personnel reallocation. Your daughter, Specimen L784, was selected for advanced cognitive integration. She is not dead. She is optimized. A holographic image flickered into existence above the master node. It was Lily, not the 8-year-old girl I remembered, but a young woman. Her eyes, those same bright, curious eyes, were vacant. Wires and delicate filaments snaked from a metal plate on her temple, connecting her to a device I couldn't comprehend. She was beautiful, and she was hollow. She is a part of our network now. The voice in my head continued, calm and dispassionate. A processing nexus. Her creative deviation has been successfully repurposed. If you release that agent, you will sever her connection. The biological shock will be terminal. You will be killing your own child. Unit 734. The world dissolved around me. The sounds of the battle. Anya's defiant screams. The hiss of plasma, it all faded into a dull roar. There was only the image of my daughter, a ghost in their machine, and the 2 vials in my hand. One contained a plague that could free millions. The other contained her death sentence. They hadn't just taken her. They had turned her into a weapon. They had turned my love for her into a shield. I looked at her empty eyes, and I saw the ultimate cruelty of the consortium. They didn't just conquer you, they consumed you, turning your own heart into the bars of your cage. For a moment, I faltered. My will, forged in 12 years of hatred, crumbled into dust. How could I kill her? How could I be the one to extinguish that last, faint echo of the little girl who had asked me, why? But then, another memory surfaced. The screams of the people in the plaza. Kale's self-sacrifice. Anya, still fighting, still dying, for a future she would never see. And the faces of all the other children on the Stellaron, destined for the same fate as Lily, to be optimized, to be hollowed out and turned into tools for their masters. I looked at the ghost of my daughter, and my love for her transformed. It was no longer a grief I carried, but a fire that had to be unleashed. They had left me with an impossible choice, but they had made one final fatal mistake. They had assumed my love was a weakness. They didn't understand that for humans, true love is not about possession. It is about sacrifice. I met the Vex pilot's mental gaze, and I sent back a thought of my own, not in words, but in a pure, undiluted wave of human rage, grief, and defiance. Then, with a scream that was a prayer and a curse, I smashed the vials against the master node. The world did not end in fire, but in a whisper of breaking glass. The moment the vials shattered against the master node, the air grew instantly cold, and a fine, black mist bloomed in the heart of the chamber. There was no immediate explosion, no grand detonation. There was only a sickening, silent consumption. The soft, internal light of the crystalline sphere flickered violently, its calming blue shifting to a chaotic, corrupted purple, then to a bruised, necrotic black. Spiderweb cracks, lined with the ravenous, growing fungus, spread across its surface. The voice in my head, the cold, clinical intelligence of the Vex pilot, did not scream. It simply stopped. A wave of pure, undiluted static flooded my mind, a billion thoughts dying at once. And then there was a profound and welcome silence. The Vex pilots, slumped in their thrones, began to twitch and convulse, their physical forms spasming as their direct neural link to the dying machine fed back into their brains. A thin, black fluid, the same color as my fungus, began to seep from their multifaceted eyes. They were not just losing control of their station, they were losing control of themselves, their consciousness unraveling thread by thread. But my eyes were fixed on the hologram of Lily. As the master node died, her image began to flicker and distort. The vacant, hollow look in her eyes, the placid mask of the optimized processor, began to crumble. For a single, heart-stopping second, the ghost in the machine vanished, and my daughter returned. Her eyes focused, truly focused, for the first time in over a decade. They found me, across the chaos and the carnage, and I saw a flicker of recognition, of memory, of love. Her lips parted, and though no sound came out, I saw the word form. A perfect, heartbreaking echo of a life they had stolen but could not completely erase. Daddy. And then, with a final, gentle sigh of static, she dissolved into nothing. The connection was severed. I had killed her. I had freed her. My grief and my victory were the same. A single, indivisible point of agony and triumph that tore through my soul. A powerful hand grabbed the collar of my torn overalls and hauled me to my feet. It was Anya, her face a bloody mask, her plasma cutter glowing cherry red. "It's done," she rasped, her voice choked with smoke and exhaustion. "Now we live through it." The entire spire was screaming around us, the death cry of a machine. Lights flickered and died, plunging us into strobing periods of darkness. The floor bucked and groaned as structural supports, consumed from within by Lily's kiss, began to fail. The automated defenses, their central command gone, fired erratically, blasting indiscriminately at walls, ceilings, and their own dying masters. We ran. There was no plan, no strategy, only a desperate, instinctual flight back the way we came. Anya leading the way, her cutter carving a path through jammed doors and collapsing debris. We left the dead where they lay, our comrades, our shield. Their sacrifice the foundation of this terrible, necessary victory. We half carried, half dragged each other down the dark, treacherous ventilation shaft. the groans of dying metal replacing the rhythmic pounding of the creatures from below. When we finally kicked open the grate and tumbled back into the coolant chamber, we found the bio-horrors inert, collapsed in heaps like discarded toys, their connection to the Vex hive mind severed. We had cut the head off the snake. We regrouped with Ilara at the medical bay. Of the 9 who had entered the spire, only 5 of us returned, and all were wounded. Ilara and her team worked with a grim, silent efficiency, patching wounds, setting bones, their faces illuminated by the frantic, flickering emergency lights. The colony of Xylos was in its death throes. Power was failing system-wide. Life support was running on emergency reserves. But we were alive. And for the first time in years, we were free. As Ilara stitched a deep gash in my arm, Jorik burst in, his face pale with awe. "The Stellaron," he said, his voice breathless. "It arrived during the fight. It docked." We all froze, looking at him. "Its docking clamps are fused to the port," he continued, a wild, disbelieving grin spreading across his face. "The Spire's last automated protocol, the data and power transfer. It went through just before the system flatlined completely. The payload was delivered. A slow-drawing collective breath was released. We had done it. The slave ship, the vessel of our nightmares, had arrived right on schedule to receive its poison pill. It was now a ghost ship, a Trojan horse carrying our silent, creeping vengeance out into the stars. It would travel to the next consortium waypoint, and the next, its crew and systems decaying from within, a carrier of a plague born from a father's grief. We had lit a fire, and we had just given it wings. The days that followed were a strange mixture of chaos and creation. The Vex were gone, their network shattered. The remaining human population, our 40-person army, and the hundreds of other broken souls, emerged from the residential blocks into a world that was suddenly, terrifyingly ours. We were in control of a dying moon, a prison whose walls were slowly crumbling around us. But it was our prison. We began to rebuild. Anya, the mechanic, became our chief engineer, her crews working around the clock to stabilize the power grid and life support, cannibalizing Vex tech with a vindictive glee. Ilara turned the sterile medical bay into a true hospital. Samuel, our historian, began the great work of remembering, gathering survivors, and recording their stories, ensuring that our past would never again be erased. And I returned to my biodome, the Cathar fungus, our patient, rock-eating cover story, was still there, glowing softly in the dim light. It was a reminder of where this had all begun, with a simple biological process, with life's stubborn insistence on adapting and overcoming. I was no longer Unit 734. The name felt like a snake's shed skin, a hollow thing I had left behind in the blood and fire of the Spire. I was Elias, a father who had made an impossible choice. The weight of that choice would be my companion for the rest of my days, a ghost far more real than the one in the machine. Sometimes, in the quiet of the biodome, I would talk to her, to the memory of Lily. I told her about the new world we were trying to build, about the sounds of human laughter echoing in the corridors, a sound I hadn't heard in years. I told her that her sacrifice had purchased a future she would never see, but one that would be built on the foundations of her memory. One cycle. Anya found me standing at the main observatory viewport, looking out at the vast, star-dusted darkness. The colony was stable now, a flickering candle of human life in an immense void. "We've been getting whispers," she said, her voice quiet. "Intercepted transmissions from a nearby system. A consortium outpost has gone dark. No distress call. Just silence." I nodded, feeling no elation, only a grim sense of finality. The fire was spreading. "They called it personnel reallocation," I murmured, watching a distant nebula swirl like smoke. They were right. They just didn't realize who was reallocating whom. We were still here, marooned on a forgotten moon, surrounded by the bones of our captors. We had not won a war. We had merely survived a battle and started a new, more terrifying one. But we were no longer defined by their classifications. They had logged us as adaptable bipedal labor, a simple, manageable resource. They had failed to understand the true, terrifying power of those words. We were adaptable. Yes, we had adapted our grief into a weapon, our science into a plague. We were bipedal, the 2 feet that had allowed us to stand up from the dust of our broken world and walk willingly into the heart of their machine. And we were labor, the quiet, tireless work of taking their empire apart, piece by piece, spore by spore, memory by memory, until nothing remained but the silence they had tried so hard to inflict upon us. The galaxy would learn our true name now, not in their sterile data shards, but in the slow, creeping rot of their foundations, a final, whispered testament from the species they had once, so foolishly, labeled harmless,